Test one, test one, test 1, 2, 3.
I think that unless there's further discussion on the process for evaluating board members, we're going to look to move forward with a meeting, more in-depth meeting with the consultants at a date soon to be decided. Without any further comment on that, we'll move into our reports and items for information with the operations update.
Okay, good evening, Board President Halsey, Board of Trustees, Dr. Cardona. Tonight's operations update, we have two quick presentations. As part of the process with the 2023 bond projects, we are going to be presenting to you tonight the elementary school renovations and the site package 1. Both of these, y'all approved the schematic design at a previous board meeting. They will be on the agenda for the regular board meeting next Tuesday night. So we're delivering the presentation tonight. So if you have any questions, you can ask Coleman. He's with Perkins. And then I'll be finishing up with an update on the 2017 bond, which was a request at last special board meeting. So Coleman.
Good evening. Thank you for letting us break this up into two sessions. I think it's a little easier. I think with Mendez's presentation next Tuesday, it'll be a little more in depth. So thank you for letting us break this into two groups. So as a part of the process, we're required to come and present at schematic design and design development. So we just want to recap. I know we just went over this last month or the month before last, but we did make a little more progress. We are ready to be able to send this out to bid now that the contractor is on board. Vaughn Construction will be handling the elementary schools through CM at risk process. We actually had a walk with them on Friday, and we walked all the buildings to show them the scope of work so they start to understand the process much better, what the materials are, what needs to be demoed out, thinking about phasing we have kids on site, so how do we fence off construction where kids don't need to be versus where kids need to be. So we've already started a lot of those internal discussions with them, so they're getting on board very quickly. As per our construction, we did complete most of the drawings. We're ready to send it out to bid once we get your approval on next Tuesday. Just as a reminder, we did have, we do now have the education specifications that you all approved. So we're making sure that we follow that, making sure, and that really brings that equity across the campuses, making sure that everybody has the same types of spaces, principals, assistant principals. We don't want to start getting different sizes for different schools, because then in 5 years from now, everybody's going, why do they have this and they get the hot tub and they get the jacuzzi, right, or the pool? So we're making sure that it's fair across. I think that was a great way to approach that for the district, especially as y'all start to grow here in the future. As I had mentioned previously, we also had a couple of different options that we reviewed with the administration on campus, talking about those advantages and disadvantages of each layout. And at the end, it was option 2 that was chosen. And really, a lot of the drivers were, one, let's see if I can try the maps up. One is really opening up this area here with glass so that they can see from the reception desk. Now they can see out and see who's coming from the exterior. Currently, right where this box is, there's an office. So reception can't see out of the building. They have to wait till somebody comes to the door, presses the doorbell to be able to see what's going on. So now they have that opportunity to see what's happening, who's approaching the school. They can also see through this angle here so that they can see out the front door. So if somebody covered up the doorbell or the camera or some things like that, they're able to see what's happening out there. So that was a big reason they chose this option. The other great thing about the layout is now when people do come, they don't have to go into the rest of the school for conferences. They can have ARDs, they can have meetings. They don't have to leave the reception area. And then also, because it seems to be a common theme here, we have access directly to a bathroom. A lot of the time parents are waiting, they have young toddlers, they need to be able to go change them. They're not having to go through the school. We can contain everybody in the main area, so you don't have to open up the rest of the school and they go wandering down the hall. So it's a big, and then parent liaison as well, direct access they can come and help, which makes a ton of sense because they were behind that area and they'd have to get up and go get them. So now they have direct access there. Just reconfiguring that area just to make sure that it's working the way that the school's working now. We did update the renderings here. Pretty straightforward. You can see the glass on the left, just so that you can see, and it will have a bullet-resistant film on that glass, as a part of our safety and security. Our reception desk up front, the Hernandez Elementary School logo in the back, just kind of give you an idea of what that feel is. In addition to that, sorry, I forgot to bring this up. We do have the 2 restrooms in the classroom wings that are getting fully renovated. We're going to take everything out and come in and have everything new. They're aging very quickly. We're going to also do some studies for the piping. We need to check and make sure that ground hasn't started to shift and break some of those pipes because we've had some maintenance issues in the past. So we're going to go make sure everything's good in there, make sure when we put everything back in that everything's kosher. And then also recently started to talk about looking at an opportunity, if we have some money, to address the restrooms next to the cafeteria. We walked those with the contractor and I'd say they need to be updated. We have some tile popping, those kinds of things. And I know that Bernie's already on top of it. They were already going in and I was like, well, fix it enough, but we might be able to address that through the bond. So we're going to take a look at that. And then also all the light blue or lavender is, we're replacing all the ceiling tiles in all the main corridors as well, since they're pretty old. They're starting to sag a little bit, and they just need to be replaced. Sorry, just to kind of give you an idea. Oh, the projection's not great. White, purple accent for the walls. The doors were matching existing, so it doesn't look like it was a retro fit. So we're matching there. Coming in with carpet for the administration area, and then our tiles are the purple and turquoise in the restrooms, and then just a very simple tile for the floors. One thing we are doing different, right now they have very small tiles, so that's creating a lot more grout joints, which causes more problems. So we're going with a larger tile to reduce the maintenance. So you're not having to go in and clean out the grout joints as often. You're not having to do those things. It just reduces your maintenance there. At Travis, there's no changes. It was a very straightforward process. Here we are adding this door in this cloud here and putting a key card on it. So in order to access the rest of the administration, you need to have a key card to get access in. And then because there is an existing door, we're also putting a key card access key on that as well. So now we've locked down that main area. And as a part of that package, we are replacing the 5 AC units at the current support, administrative support or transportation, the original transportation building. These 5 units are being replaced due to the R22 requirements that are coming our way for code. Any questions that I can answer for those?
So you said this is going out as a whole package?
Yes, these three schools are going out as one. Yeah,
Okay,
as one package.
And is that inclusive of this HVAC work?
Yes.
It's-
Yep.
Where is this? I may have just missed that.
Support services building, where the original transportation building is.
On Hunter Road?
The one on Hunter Road,
Oh, yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, so then you're saying the package would be Hernandez, Travis, and the HVAC, okay.
And so when the contractor comes back, it'll be one GMP, guaranteed maximum price for those
Okay.
3. It's just the size of these projects, we're trying to get them a little bit bigger so we get a little more interest in the market. The market is tough right now. I mean, everybody's busy, so we want to make sure that we get enough interest with some of these projects to make sure that, some subs are taking a look at it as well. And then quick update on the site package and renovations. At Bonham Pre-K, we do have some minor changes to that front entry from what I presented last time. The image on the right is what I presented. Image on the left is what we're planning to go out to bid with. We're just aligning some of the existing drives, making sure that we're able to keep that concession stand as I'd mentioned previously. That's really the biggest change there, just from a grading standpoint. We are in the process of already submitting these to the city. Right now, site plans are taking 4 to 5 months for approval through the city. So we've tried to get this in early enough that so when the contractor's on board, they're bidded, we can hopefully get them under construction here pretty quickly. The good thing about this project is most of the projects in this package are just coat and reseal. So it's a maintenance thing. You don't need a permit for those. So we're able to possibly, depending on the contractor, be able to start some of these a little bit sooner. The hard thing is when we coat and reseal and restripe, got to think about traffic, during the school year. So are there opportunities to do that on the weekend or portions of it on the weekend? We'll know that when we get our contractor on board. At Bowie, we are coming in and coating and resealing in that hatched area. Your existing turns are already concrete, so that's great news because usually that's where the buses really tear up all the asphalt, right? They're much heavier on turns. They tend to mess the asphalt up, so they're concrete. We don't have to worry about that. And then we do need to, as I mentioned, change out this apron here or this drive to concrete just to meet our current city code, since that code's newer than when this was built. So we'll update that when we're making these changes. At Crockett, same scope. The front drive will all be coated, resealed, and restriped as well as the back. And then the service drive along and bus loop along the back is already concrete, so no work back there. At De Zavala, trying to get you a little better image of what that looks like. So here, a little bit different than what I presented previously. We do have our parking in this center area here. And so when parents come and drop off, they're not having to go through any parking. They're in their own lane. There's no conflict between parkers or non-parkers. If somebody needs to back up, you don't have to worry about that like at Chick-fil-A when you're in line and people are trying to leave. So we're kind of doing the same thing here, making sure we're separating our parking from the parent drop-off loop. Because once those parents start getting there at 10:30 in the morning, waiting for their kid to get out at 3, it's going to start backing up pretty quickly. So made that change. And then I did double check, President Halsey, that we are addressing each one of those drainage that's coming across that's causing kind of that muddy issue there. So we are coming in. And then just with the additional expansion of this parking lot, it does require us to create a detention pond, which is right here. And what that detention pond does is it holds the water on our site and then releases it slowly so we don't flood our neighbors down the hill is really what the purpose of those are.
Can I ask a question real quick? So you're rerouting the traffic pattern to keep it out of the parking, but Bowie, we're leaving the traffic pattern going right through the faculty parking still? There's not a way we can fix that? It's been a few years since I had a kid in that school, but that was horrible, and I felt so bad for those teachers, and everybody was trying to get in to pick up their kids, and they couldn't get into park.
That was not in the scope, but we can definitely, let's take a look at that and talk.
I know there's less room there, but I always thought that was just, I always joked and said an Aggie designed it.
Excuse me? Excuse me?
How many Aggies do we have?
Fighting words.
So we can, yes, let's take a look.
Hey, I've got an Aggie CEO cup. I'll just.
And my daughter goes to A&M. It's all in fun.
Okay, then.
Let us take a look. I think as we start getting prices, from construction projects that are, starting to come up, right, we're going to be presenting a couple next week as well, so we'll be able to see how budgets are going. And at Travis, the same, you have your existing drives along the back, the bus and the service are all concrete. So we will come in and reseal and restrike the entire front parking lot. That one's in pretty bad need of getting redone. There are areas throughout, I'd say Bowie and Travis that need to be basically cut out, repacked, and then resealed because of the alligatoring that I talked about previously. And that is all I have for the site package.
Can I, you mentioned delays, what sounded like probably delays in getting the city, what are they, the permitting?
The site
So
permit.
can you kind of give us a quick, what is the timeline of this? So you get the site permit, then construction starts? How does that work?
Yeah, so, yes, so same with the middle school, elementary, we have no site package, the elementary school, or middle schools will be the same way. You have to wait to get the site permit to do any site work. In the past, we've been able to do interior work, and so at the elementary, we should, or I'm gonna say middle schools, we could go in and start doing interior renovations as we wait for the site permit to be approved through the city. The good thing is we do have Gill Engineering, who's on the project, I think for all the bond projects. He's worked with the city quite a bit, knows kind of like the path he needs to take. He understands the issues that they've seen in the past, so he addresses them. Yeah, and we have been very upfront with the city. We reviewed all these plans with them early on. We're doing that same with Mendez here pretty soon, just to get them updated, know what projects are coming their way for their review, understand the scope. Had the fire marshal, we had everybody on the call, so they understand the scope much better.
So does Perkinson will submit the site permitting, or does the contractor?
We will, the civil engineer will,
Okay.
through us, so as together, we'll
Okay.
submit all the packages together.
Okay.
On Mendez, we think we'll be able to have enough progress to be able to submit that early, just the site package a little bit early. They don't need 100% construction documents, so we might be able to submit those a little bit early. We'll know a little bit more in March.
So when will you submit these two packages?
There are, the site package is already submitted.
For these two projects?
Yes, yeah, because we
Okay.
want them to, we're trying to get them in as soon as we can.
Okay, and
We
so we-
like to do a permit set is what we call it, and it's for their review. But they have both of these packages already.
Okay, so if everything goes according to plan, we could be doing these construction projects this summer,
Oh,
is what it sounds
absolutely.
like?
Yes, that's the
Okay.
goal. We're hoping to start construction for De Zavala and Bonham, hopefully before the summer.
Okay.
That way they can start moving the dirt. It's not gonna affect, drives, those types of things. It'll probably take 4 months to get that construction done. So we're hoping to get started April is
Okay.
the goal.
Thank you.
So, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Okay, so at the last special board meeting, there was a request to update the school board on the 2017 bond. And for those of y'all that were here, y'all remember that the 2017 bond was $107 million, and it consisted of the following projects. Rodriguez, we did some renovations to the elementary schools, De Zavala and Miller Middle School additions and renovations. We did the STEAM Center and other additions here at the high school. So and of course we had transportation annex was built, and then we had some technology and security. So this slide right here, I presented to y'all back in 2021, and as you could see on the right-hand column, we were starting to track about a $5.1 million savings. So then we start thinking, okay, well, what is the opportunity with that $5.1 million? So in February of 2022, I brought this list to the school board. We also ranked them as best we could based on the need that we had. So the school board back, I think it was in February, no, it was shortly after February, I think in March, we agreed, or y'all gave us approval to proceed with the following projects. So all these projects that you see have been completed. We're able to purchase 6 new buses, a lot of fencing, the auditorium lighting, security cameras. I mean, you can see the list right there. So all these projects have been completed with the additional supplemental savings of the 2017 bond. And then the budget, the original budget, we were tracking just over 5 million. The projects that you just saw, they were 4.1 million. Actually, the revised budget came in at 5.3 million, so we had a little bit more than what we originally planned. So then we came back to y'all and said, okay, well, we've got 1.1 million, what can we do with it? So we had these other projects that y'all let us proceed with. We got a portable for the Crossroads program behind El Centro. We got a new portable for the transportation building. Those are in place, they've been completed. The EERS here at the high school, that's the emergency response radio system, $206,000. The reason that's highlighted is because we're able to put those funds back into the bond because we were able to pay for that with a safety grant that we got. So that money got to go back to the bond. We still haven't addressed the lighting at the bus annex. That was a permitting issue. We just got the permit done, so now we're going to send it out to bid. And then the ADA playground equipment, we're at $251,000 originally. We've come back and we've allocated another $100,000 for additional equipment to make sure we have equity across all the playgrounds and additional access. So that represents $649,000. So basically we're looking, if everything tracks the way we're tracking, still with the surplus of $545,000 in 2017 bond funds. And it's my recommendation that we hold on to that and let's see what happens with central office. We've run into some issues with central office, if y'all remember, and we're going to give you an update probably in February with central office. But we kept the decking on the roof, and there was a lot of steel reinforcement that had to go because we're putting our HVAC units on top of the roof. So we had to, we're working with the contractor right now and the architect to look at this steel reinforcement and look at the cost. So I'm just asking that we consider that. Now, obviously, we're going to do whatever you want to do with this, but that would be my recommendation, that we hold on to it for a little longer and see what those costs come in. And then we also have what will be presented next month to you would be the new central office, the learning area that we talked about, the additional learning center that we talked about expanding out. So you'll see that next month at our board meeting.
I recall that were going to be giving the band a new practice pad, and that had been put on hold when we move forward with the natatorium. So is that going to be addressed with funds from the bonds that we just passed in 2023, or should we be holding on to these funds so that we can follow through on that as well?
The band pad, we made the decision to put it in the 2023 bond under the high school project.
Okay.
Only because of the site circulation that we're going to do, only because of the additions that we're going to do to the fine arts program. We've got the natatorium, which you'll hear about next month as well, back here in the back of the property. So that's why we decided to include it with, but it is allocated, or it is in the scope of work for the high school.
For the 23 bond?
2023 bond.
Okay,
yes.
so we don't need to reserve these funds for that?
No.
Are there any other projects that we had considered moved on, anything that I'm not remembering, Mr. Sandoval?
No, I mean, I can go back to that list. We do have to take about $75,000, maybe $100,000 for the annex lighting, the transportation annex lighting, but we can go back to the list and see. It's good to have that cushion. I know we want to spend the money, but it's good to have that cushion in the event something happens. And we were fortunate with all the safety items that came out that we were able to use the supplemental 2017 bond for a lot of the fencing, a lot of the security cameras, a lot of the things that we did there. Okay?
Thank you for this.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Then let's move into agenda preparation for the regular January 16th school board meeting. Mr. Superintendent.
Good evening and Happy New Year. I don't know if, for the sake of moving on to the bond or the budget, if you want me to read line by line every single item here, or if we just want to in general so that we can move on
To the budget
workshop. Like if you want me to read like what we're going to talk about, or can you
I thought we were gonna do the agenda prep and then the budget workshop.
That's what I'm asking.
Oh.
So I'm asking if, do you want me
Oh,
to read
much
every
detail.
single thing? How much detail do you want me to go over?
I see. I think we should talk about closed session. Unless, does anybody have questions on the closed session items?
I will say, in one of the closed session for safety and security, we can update the board and say that we won our appeal on the high school audit. So they did come back and say that they were wrong and we were right. And so we don't have to take any action because of that. Our building was secure and that person wasn't here. And then I am submitting this week the items to address the Goodnight audit.
We had previously requested the academic update on math, where you see that here, the operations update as we just discussed. Consent agenda items seem pretty straightforward.
I think the board does need to know on the Board of Trustees for the elections. And I don't know if, Alicia, you want to go up to the mic? Alicia has been working, getting ready for the May elections about some potential issues with Caldwell and Guadalupe County running a Saturday voting site on the day of election. And, we're waiting to see what happens, but, if we have voting at those sites on Saturdays, I think, we don't have the numbers for Caldwell County because last election, Hayes County ran their elections for them. And then Guadalupe County had 2 people vote on Saturday. And so potentially, because this is the at-large trustees, the board may have to look at, and we've asked them to give us a cost estimate of potentially what it would cost to run elections out of St. Joseph's Catholic Church, I think it is, in Guadalupe County, for what would amount to be 2 people. Because we would have to pay for the equipment to go out there, the staffing, and they're gonna get us that information for y'all to consider.
Yeah, so what is happening is that I have contacted Caldwell and Guadalupe County and Hayes. So right now, for the order of election that it is to be presented during the January 16th board meeting, I have to bring up the polling locations and at least the early voting locations. So on the schedule, they are not planning on opening any sites for Caldwell or Guadalupe on Saturday because of the amount of people that they are actually voting. So what I did is I did my research, and basically on the 2021 election for Guadalupe County, for the whole day, there were only 2 individuals that they went and voted. So you have this polling location, from 8 to 5, and you're paying the clerks and you're paying the judge, and you're using machines and everything, and it is really a very expensive just for two people to go and vote. For the Caldwell County, what happened in 2021 actually, because they didn't have an appraisal, an election officer at that time, then Hayes County ran the elections for us. With that said, then the only thing that I was able to get it was that on that particular Saturday, only 9 individuals vote on that location for the whole day.
And that's a Saturday that is election day.
Yes.
Because otherwise,
Election day.
right, because early voting,
During the early voting. The early voting, we normally have a Saturday, additional to the election day that
Okay.
it is on a Saturday. So it's just for the early voting that have Guadalupe and Caldwell, they are not planning on opening those 2 locations because it's more expensive.
but on early voting, if it, during early voting, Caldwell residents and Guadalupe residents can vote in Hayes County.
During the 2021, yes, ma'am.
Right.
But it was because they were running the elections for us. So that's the only thing. The only thing is also they are going to be opening locations, that particular, the 3 Rivers, On Monday and Tuesday after that Saturday, they're gonna be opening from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. So then they would be able to go and vote at that time. And basically, Hayes County, they are gonna be opening on Saturday, but the amount of people that they vote is larger than what we have in Guadalupe and Caldwell County.
So can I just, I'm a little confused and I want to make sure I understand correctly. We will have 10 days of early voting prior to the election. Those 10 days include one Saturday.
Correct.
That one Saturday, Caldwell and Guadalupe counties will not have their sites open, but all of the other days they will.
Yes, ma'am, correct.
Okay. I
Correct.
just wanted to make sure that we all understood.
Yes, and I have talked to Guadalupe County, and they are saying, you know, because they are gonna have another joint election, so they would increase also the cost to the other entities. So it would be very unfair for them to pay just for two people that they vote for San Marcos CISD. But, yes, ma'am.
So do we have any action that we need to take? Are we going to be given options, or is this just a notification?
Well, there is an option, you know, and I check, and if there are 15 people that they would like that polling location to be open on a Saturday, then they have to sign a petition. There has to be a minimum of 15 people. They have to come and request that day. So if you only had 2 people to vote on a Saturday, I don't think that you're gonna, maybe we might gonna find.
And just to clarify further, on that Saturday, before the election, those people could come to Hayes County and vote in our
They can't
courthouse.
That was a special.
They cannot.
It was just that specific
Okay.
election
Okay.
that they were running
But
for us.
they could go on Monday or
They
Tuesday
can
from
go
7 a.m.
Monday
to 7
through
p.m.
Friday, and then Monday and Tuesday.
Okay.
And election day.
And
And
election
election
day,
day,
which will
correct.
also be a Saturday.
Correct.
Okay,
So we just need to make sure we message
So we
to
do.
Right.
those areas
Yeah.
right.
pretty clearly what their options are.
Right,
Okay.
so it's just for you
Okay.
to know, and then if I don't receive anything, then, because it's coming that I have to present the order of election, because if we don't do it by the 16th, then we will have to have a special board meeting like we did last year
Yeah.
to be able to get the order of election. So I'm just trying to see if we can vote on the January 16th board meeting, so in that way we are gonna avoid to have a second.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for telling us about this. I think, sounds like we all understand.
And then
I don't think we're quite there yet. Sorry. So the 6th item on items for action is the discussion regarding the police force committee charge and expectation. I think we should talk about what the structure of that discussion is going to be. Are we going to be making the appointments there? Are we having finalizing the charge to the committee?
I don't know, I thought we had finalized the structure, so are we,
I think we have the list, we're just gathering it. I thought you had sent something.
We sent something out as part of the board update today.
okay.
Interested parties, any interested parents that want to be on the committee, let us know, fill out a questionnaire. Get those, the high school, somebody representing middle school, high school, elementary.
So I don't think we need to.
I have a question. How much research have we done into the cost of establishing a police force for the district? Have we looked at, before we start involving the community, and I mean, we've have parents who are willing to be part of that, and, you know, time is precious. Have we looked into that and see if that's something we can actually even begin to afford and govern? Having come from that arena for a long time, I know it's not cheap, and thumbing through the budget report or budget workshop we're gonna go into, I'm just kinda concerned that we even have the funds, or we even have a ballpark.
We did.
We did get a,
Provided it at the last closed session. I had distributed out the cost comparison between the Marshall cost, program cost.
Yeah, I remember that. I know that we've looked at it that way, but I'm just trying to look at it a little bit more at large. Like, it is a lot. And while I'd like to see something be discussed. Before we get into a lot of discussion and using a lot of people's time, I'd like to see if that's something we've actually really seriously considered, what the implication of creating a police force actually means, because it doesn't start and end with the school day. An officer's an officer 24/7, and there's a lot that comes into that. I just want to make sure we've completely reviewed all that before we start looking at taking people's time to discuss it, to just chunk it at the end of the
So I
discussion.
think the idea of the panel was to look at the pros and cons, right? Because expenses is a big part of it, but safety is also. And I think that we heard when we enacted the Marshall program that there was a lot of objection to it, and I didn't feel that there was a lot of support from it besides on this dais. And so I think giving our community an opportunity for something different than that is where my head was on this discussion. Because if we prioritize it, the state has mandated that we have to have armed guards. I think that we should have a more open conversation about what that looks like for us and what we think is actually a deterrent to violence. Is it a Marshall program? Is it an armed guard? And as a school district, we've had SROs for a long time that have a lot of positive support within our district. So if we want to stay on that route, then we need to consider the cost that we're paying to keep the SRO program and how that's going, and that needs to be included in this as well, because the police force would not, then we would not have that contract with the police department.
Right,
And so I think that's the idea here, is to get input from our whole community about that. And so, no, I don't think we have a detailed, and I think that the cost estimate that we saw was just that. It was a ballpark estimate. And so I think that the idea is to understand what are the pros and cons.
I tend to agree with Ms. Lopez. I think that when we were thinking about protecting our students and the safety of our students, I was all in favor of the Marshall program, because I thought that it provided what we needed in our elementary schools, because we're covered with SROs on the secondary level. But I think to take on a whole police department funded through our school district, I think that's going to be a big challenge. And I think that one of the first considerations should be the money that's going to be involved in it. I don't know that we need police running around in our 4-year-old campus. I think that a Marshall really meets the needs, because some of the protests that we had when we were looking at the Marshall program was because people were confused and they thought that we were going to arm teachers, or that a teacher was going to be the designated person. And those people that are against teachers carrying guns, I think they came out and they spoke to us.
So I think we're actually now veering into the conversation that we should be having on the board meeting. So I'm retracting what I said about maybe we don't need to have this item. I think we definitely need to have the item on. I think we need to have, it seems like a conversation again about why we're doing this, what we would hope to get out of this, what the process would be. Also, if we have any more updated information on budget, maybe to take a look at that, especially since we're going to be talking budget here in just a minute. And then also talk about the composition, because at that point we should hopefully have specific people who are volunteering to participate this and sort of.
Can we get the charge that we voted on
Yes.
last time included, so
I
that
need
we
the
understand? Because we did vote on a charge
Yeah.
last time, and there's language around that. And so if we could have that included, I think it might provide a little more guidance to what we're asking of people and what we're considering.
Yep.
Thank you.
Anything else on that? Okay, then I think there was a question that came up about, we were given a report from administration about the costs for our extracurricular activities, and a question about whether or not we were going to have that report presented in a meeting, and if we wanted to have a discussion around that, and how that would look and what would happen. Dr. Salmi, do you have?
And I'm satisfied with starting the conversation during our budget. I think that some of the questions can be answered during the budget conversation, and if there are more outstanding questions, or that we can tackle it that way, I'm satisfied with
Okay.
that.
Anything else that anybody would like to make sure that we are addressing on the regular agenda of the January meeting? Going once, going twice, okay. Now the budget workshop, please, and thank you.
Good evening, Board. I did provide everybody a copy of this presentation, so that you can see the figures. So this is the first budget workshop that we'll do this budget season here in January. As we proceed through the spring semester, we'll have more opportunities for budget conversations, as well as tying in HR conversations with these budget workshops. Tonight, what we'll look at is reviewing what those district revenue resources, how they come to the district. We'll look at a little brief history of our budgeting practices here in San Marcos CISD. We'll look at a very rough estimate, very early estimate of a revenue projection as we close out 23, 24, and we move into 24, 25. Talk briefly about how all that comes together in terms of building the budget package that we bring to the board, and then we'll also review timelines as well. I do want to point out that Ms. Garcia and I, and we've talked with Cabinet, that we do have a budgetary goal in mind that by 2025 we are adopting a deficit budget at or below $5 million. We are working on bringing that deficit budget that we had last year down. So I just want to make sure that we all understand that we are moving in that type of direction to bring forward the more balanced budget.
Is that a goal that y'all have set, or is that a goal that came from auditors? Where is that number coming from?
That was an internal goal that as we bring forth information, we're looking at how can we get to a closer balanced budget.
Thanks.
What makes up the budget? You have revenues and expenditures, right? Within revenues, and that's where we're going to focus most of our conversation in tonight, is we have state allocations, local allocations, and federal allocations. When I say allocations, local tax collections. Our expenditures are made up of those particular items: payroll costs, contract services, supplies, materials, operating costs, and then capital outlay. You can also, when we talk expenditures, note that the greater majority of districts, if not all districts, your payroll cost is going to be the most substantial out of those percentages. As we move forward, you'll see that when we bring forth HR packages, you'll see that does impact our overall budget. So when you look at district revenue, right? So revenue projections begin, they really never end with me. I'm looking at numbers as soon as we get ADA numbers in every 6 weeks. I'm plugging in a massive template, just seeing where we're going to move in terms of how we're going to collect in that fiscal year and how we're going to collect in future years. So we look at those ADA numbers, past trends. We look at demographer data as well. We look at previous tax collection data. We look at also property value data, and that property value, how it influences our tax levy. We look at ADA. Keep in mind that this conversation starts in January, but we won't actually certify our tax rolls until August, right? And that's when we'll bring forth in August, September our tax rates. In June is when we'll certify or pass our budget, because we're a June, July fiscal year. At this point in time, like I was saying, we don't have a tremendous amount of data yet. We have first and second 6 weeks ADA, third 6 weeks ADA. Calculations are still being finalized in PEMS collection. Here at the end of the month, they'll be able to tie that data in, and it starts honing in a little bit better number. What you'll see here, I wanted to point this out and have this concept in your mind. In terms of the revenue resources, or revenue sources that we have. So think about, we get money from our taxpayers, from our tax collection office, and then we have money coming in from II.A. The bulk of your revenue is going to come from your tax revenue, right? But keep in mind, it's lumpy. I don't know how else to really describe it. It kind of comes at us in different times, and it doesn't really match our fiscal year, right? So you'll see here, I didn't put numbers in, but the trend is typically in December, you start seeing an increase in your tax collection, i.e. we start receiving that revenue, and it will trend upwards until we start hitting about June. And then in June, it starts declining. And keep in mind, at that peak, a school district has to be able to finish out that school year and really go all the way back into the next December with that revenue that they're getting. So even though you'll see an increase in your fund balance at that point in time, we got to make sure that we can sustain throughout the next year until we start getting tax collection. So that's the timeline, if you will, on your tax collection. II.A. is playing a different timeline. So the two graphics you'll see right here, the first top one is our fiscal year timeline. We're July 1st through June 30th fiscal year. So keep in mind that's what our budget that we're working on this year, or right now, is for the 24-25 school year. But TEA plays a different game, right? They really start looking at your payment allocation starting in the June of that year, June of 2023, and it could really, we could receive payments and receive funds from TEA for that fiscal year 2 years down the road. Why is that? Well, primarily it's all based on PEMS submissions. We, as a school district, submit PEMS data in December, January timeframe. We also have a summer PEMS submission, and it takes time for TA to make those calculations. Also, you think on the tax collector side, the appraisal side, there's protests and there's delays in that, delays in payments, so it can take some time in getting those changes. And like we remember back in December with Robbie Harbook, how he talked about if we have some protests and we have some changes in those values, it will influence how much TEA will provide for us. So it won't be uncommon if you hear that we're collecting revenue for this current fiscal year in September, which is outside of this current fiscal year. So kind of an illustration of that. This is actually a screenshot from our payment ledger in TEA, on the TEA website, the Foundation School website. Something I want to point out, you can see right here, this is for the fiscal year 23-24. So current year, again, looking at June of 23, you see your foundations allotment, that's TEA, that's your tier 1 allotment. Notice how it's 2.5 million, and it's humming along at 2.5 million until we get to September of 23. Then all of a sudden it jumps up to 9.5. The reason for that is that's the passage of Senate Bill 2. Remember back in the summer, Senate Bill 2 passed through Texas legislation, and it shifted the burden, if you will, from the taxpayer fronting the cost over to TEA. It shifted, it provided your homeowners the $100,000 exemption compared to the $40,000 exemption, which it did free up and provide more revenue for us. However, I want to point out that in September of that year, that's when we get to that near final settle up phase. So TEA is starting to get more data, they're starting to push out the funds more accordingly to the actual real data that in comparison we have projection data. But that 6.5 million figure that you see right there, that is that recapture payment that we were talking about last year. So keep in mind, even though that we're in a different fiscal year currently, we still were under the recapture rules that didn't change until the summer, right? So we still had to make up that $6.5 million payment. We didn't have to write a check. It was accounted for. We had that 9.6. They were able to remove that 6.5 from us. That's something that we shouldn't see going forward, but I did want to point out how that does affect your payment ledger. And you can see we go from that $9.6 million owed down to really just roughly $3 million. So it did have an influence on our payment ledger right now. So looking at the history, right, of San Marcos budget, looking at 2020 through 2024, you can see within this graphic, the blue line represents your total budgeted revenue. That's the revenue that we said when we brought forth our budget and passed that budget in June, how much money we anticipate to receive. The interesting trend in that is it really kind of hovers around that $80 million. It kind of goes up and then it kind of comes down. You look at the orange line, that's your total budgeted expenditures. Take note that it is trending upwards. Now keep in mind that $105 million deficit is what we're addressing with our goal. Keep in mind a lot of that in that 105.7 million deficit, we did have packages for central office. We did also have some other high dollar ticket items, if you will, that are not going to be within this year's budget. We actually budgeted for an $8 million recapture. It came in at 6.5, but that was also part of that budget deficit that again won't be in this budget or the budgets going forward. And then the total budget deficit, if you will, is the gray line, and it mimics that expenditure line In 21-22, we were at 1.3, 3.2, and then it started going upwards. So again, I just wanted to point out some data trends that we have in our district. So this graphic here next represents our budgeted revenue versus our actual revenue. Again, in June, we said, and we anticipated based on our projections, how much we would actually receive versus how much we actually, what we thought we would receive versus what we actually did receive. One thing that I want to point out too, we don't have the actual revenue yet for 2024, obviously, but in 23, you can see that we did receive that $91.1 million actual revenue versus what we anticipated being 82. That can be attributed to, again, that increase in property value, increase in tax revenue, and that was that recapture piece. So it ties back into that $6.5 million that you saw on your payment ledger is coming out of, we received it, but then it went right out the door. So if you look at trends over the few years though, and it's something that kind of really, I think, sticks to this conversation in an important way. So over the last 4 years, our average budgeted revenue is averaging 81 to 82, closer to 81 million. Over the last 3 years, because we don't have 24 yet, we're looking at an average of 85.6. However, when you take that 6.5 million in account and pull that out because that recapture, let's say it didn't exist, right? We're literally looking at, we're averaging about $83.5 million in our actual revenue. So we're getting close to what we say we anticipate receiving versus what we actually are receiving. And that's a figure that kind of keep in mind as we move through this semester and budgeting season. That figure, the $83 million, $82, $83 million figure is the trend. I wanted to flip over and talk a little bit about our expenditures as well. You can see over the last few years that our budgeted expenditures, you can see that they are trending upwards versus our actual expenditures. A few things to think about as we talk about this slide. When you look at averages, right, that 105 really kind of throws off that metric. It really throws out that we're averaging around $90.5 million worth of expenditures when we budget, right? Our actual expenditures averaging closer to 80 million. But when you, again, look at that recapture payment, pull that out of that 105.7, it really adjusts our average expenditures are around 85 to 86 million dollars. That's what our actual expenditures are. So right now, our current projection, based on, again, just 6 weeks of ADA, the changes in this last legislative cycle and all the impacts thereof, we're looking at right now of roughly $84 million revenue projection to close out this year. As we move through this budgeting cycle, you'll see a 24-25 projection, but keep in mind, we build those revenue projections based on current year school ADA for the next year. A few things to consider. Second 6 weeks ADA is typically the highest. Your lowest are your 5th and 6th 6 weeks ADA. So we can probably start seeing, when you start calculating those ADAs per 6 weeks, you can probably anticipate that 84 being closer to that 82 to 83 million dollars.
Can I interrupt and just request the first slide that you showed us with the budgeted revenue and budgeted expenditures? Could we get the actual revenue and actual expenditures over the periods of times that we have that data plotted? They're on different, so the y-axes on those graphs are different. It's a little hard to make comparisons when you have them broken down the way you do.
Okay.
The
Yes.
red lines together on your two other graphs.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can.
And actually, with the discrepancy, right, like how good did we actually match our budgeted? So you did budgeted, right, but on actuals?
Correct.
So do we see any trends for actual expenditures and revenue?
Yes, I
That are
can provide
valuable.
that information. I looked at that graphic as well, or that information. Things to consider on that, really, when we budget for staff,
That's gonna be your largest overall budgeted item. But we anticipate if a staff member were to walk into our district, we're paying not only their salary, they're paying their retirement, and paying insurance. Not every employee will take insurance, right? So, or with the volatility that we've seen over the past few years in staffing, not just here, but everywhere, we have people come in who might be a 20-year teacher, we're paying them at a different scale. They leave and we replace them with a second-year teacher, so it really throws
Yeah.
off that. But
I
I can
understand.
definitely provide that information.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see how our budgeting versus our actuals compare over the same period of time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So also wanted to talk a little bit about fund balance and the concept of not just fund balance, but also available cash on hand, right? So again, thinking back to that lumpy graph of when we actually get our tax revenue in, which is the bulk of our revenue resource for a school district. The last 3 years of our June audited fund balance, you can see has gone from 48.9 to 59.8. So we are seeing that growth within our fund balance, which is good, right? That's your savings account. It's very difficult to grow, but it can go very quickly, right? That also helps us in our rainy day fund, for lack of better terms, our 3-month cushion, if you will. So that way, if anything comes up, we have the availability to make our payments, pay our resources, pay our teachers, et cetera.
Remind me, what's the amount the state requires us to have in our fund balance?
3 months on hand
No, but the actual, there's,
of your budget, 3 months of
Okay.
your budget. So Denise,
and-
what is that, like roughly 20? Yeah, roughly 25 right now based on our budget.
okay, so we're safe right now.
Why don't
right
we have
now.
that?
Well, I don't have December because we're still doing reconciliation. We don't have that number yet. But you can see, though, I wanted to make this point clear, though, that by December, even though we have that audited fund balance in June, by December, we're cutting into it quite significantly. So just when I do get that December of this current year figure, I can definitely provide that for you. But just note that the concept of in June we have a healthy fund balance. We still have a healthy fund balance, but it starts running lower because we're still making payments and we're not seeing that income yet. And so we got to make sure that we have that cushion and we have that available cash on hand.
But so that's also not showing, I mean, the 59 or 54, whatever's on the top line, it's showing some encumbered funds, but not all of the encumbered funds, because the bottom line should be non-encumbered, but in between there are some dollars that we have committed but aren't showing up on that grid, correct?
Correct. It's not a detailed
Okay.
report, it's just 2 snapshot figures.
Because it's hard for us to know then from, I mean, this is useful for you all in terms of figuring out payroll, right? But this is not super helpful for us, and, I mean, it's good to see, but it's not really relevant for us in terms of figuring out what we're allocating in various places.
It can be in the fact that if we commit funds, we gotta make sure that we have that available cash on hand as we move forward.
Right.
That's the big picture in terms of what I was trying
Okay.
to convey with this.
Right, but we should never, I mean, that bottom line should never actually be as low as it is. It shouldn't be less than 25, but it sometimes is going to be, but we should,
It can, yes.
Right.
It can dip because, again, a lag in revenue income, and we're working off our savings account, but once we start getting that income, it will pick back up.
gotcha. Okay, thank you.
I have a question, or maybe, I don't know, I'm not sure. But the audited figures show an increase every year.
Correct.
Then we have the December, well, first let me ask, is that because maybe we have increase in ADA? Or is that number, does that reflect our?
We haven't seen a significant increase in ADA over the last few years. Something that even our auditor pointed out was ESSER funds over the last few years have been able to provide
I
a
was just
savings
wondering
for
what the
districts.
increase. And so, because we're really, December, we're really low, and we're just kind of interested.
Right, and it goes back to that timetable in terms of your tax collection and your taxes coming to a school district. It starts picking up in December. It really peaks throughout the spring, and then you've received all your payouts, so you've got to use that money until you get back to the next December.
Thank you.
So that's the revenue expenditure concepts. Again, I just wanted to bring forth some data so that way it is in your mind, so that way when we move through this semester, you see the bigger picture concepts of, if you will, of what we're actually working with in terms of a number, right? When we actually develop the budget, admin team, Office of Academics, Human Resources, Finance, leadership, not only from central office, but also campus leadership, department leadership, look at enrollment data, we look at trend data, we look at demographics, demographers, excuse me. We look at projections and roll-up projections. We look at who's in this grade level, they should move to this next grade level. Those numbers help build that projected enrollment for each campus. And we're able to make those decisions or have those conversations that lead us making decisions on how we calculate staff allocations per campus. I know later on as we talk HR, we'll have some information from TASB and their studies in terms of what our campus allocations look like in comparison to comparison districts. Then we tie in our projected enrollment with our projection of revenue. We tie in campus data templates. We look at projected numbers. We distribute accordingly. We work with campus leadership and receive their input. From the campus side, they're getting input from their stakeholders as well. And drive it a little bit further. Department and campus leaders, they work with their staff, they work with their leadership teams within each of the department or within each campus to identify the needs that they need to address throughout the next year. They bring those needs, they look at how to allocate a budget dollar to support those students or support those needs. We also, through this time frame, we provide an avenue for department leaders and campus leaders to provide supplemental requests that are brought forth to the cabinet and discussed, considered, and attached into the budget if approved. And then also any additional, in this time frame as well, any additional FTE, any additional as teacher allocation, again, can be submitted through that supplemental request time frame that then can be reviewed, considered, and approved, if you will, through this process.
Can you talk a little more about this process? Like, is this something that any teacher could do? Is this something that any leader in a school could do? What is the process?
So, yeah, so if you look at like campus, for example, principal would get their total allocation. We break out how much is supporting staff, and then we also break out how much is supporting their maintenance and operation, their day-to-day operations, right? If a campus leader says, hey, I need additional FTEs in this grade, we look at, is there data to support that request? If so, how do we either allocate that FTE or we move? Let's say third grade is going to just bump, but second grade is going to take a dip. How do we maybe not allocate the FTE, but we just move that FTE? At that campus and even the department level, again, they should be getting feedback from their stakeholders, talking with their campus leadership, talking with their teachers on the campus to get that input, to identify the needs, to align their budget allocation to those needs to address student need, the greatest impact.
And you said they should be. So do we have a way to understand if that's happening in an equitable way among all of our campuses? I'm just sort of curious, how do we ensure that the such and such elementary and such elementary are sort of having the same kinds of conversations with their staff and their department chairs and their other programs? Is that something that the administration is responsible to sort of ensure and make sure of? Or if a principal, and this, I don't think this happens here, but I just want to understand what our process is as a district for all of our different schools to ensure that a principal who really doesn't want to support something, even though the district has said we want to support that, does that principal then have a means through this budgeting process to devalue that thing. And so what is our process is really,
I think it ties back into campuses, departments have their conversations, but ultimately they do have conversations with that team that I'm talking about, the Office of Academics, HR, Finance, and then those conversations also with Cabinet. So there's several layers through developing that budget to then move forward into getting the budget approved.
And one of the things when we present on the TASB staffing model, so she's going to present from you what the baseline, like what programs need to operate baseline, what staffing needs to be. And then the conversations we have with academics like AVID, Gear Up, all of the fine arts programs, athletics, then if we want a bigger focus on, you know, certain areas like AVID, we're trying to promote that at elementary all the way to high school, then we have a baseline, but if those programs as a district, we have a greater mission and we want more resources, then we can tweak how we allocate. And then if we are looking at maybe certain campuses that we know are not performing at state level, then we need to allocate additional resources like instructional aids. Maybe our ratios need to look different in those classrooms. And so we're gonna give a baseline, and then based on academics, finance, HR, looking at programs, what is academics vision, that we have these type of programs, and what do we staff if we're at base, or do we need to go above and beyond?
so it sounds like when you say we, the administrative staff would make a recommendation that such and such school needs more support in this area, and we're going to allocate those funds regardless of a whether or not the principal was to request those funds. Is that what you're saying?
If a school has academic
Sure.
difficulties, that's like required by law. Like the state requires us to sit together as a team with the campus leadership and say, what else are we going to do to, like, these are the non-negotiables. This is your scores in reading and math. What else do we need to do to support you on top of what you already are allocated to ensure that we're providing the kids the resources they need to be successful? And then part of that is the campus improvement committees, you know, that is required. The campus principals have a requirement to, as they're going through the budget process, to have those conversations. So teachers are in that campus improvement committee, parents are on that committee, so that they're getting feedback from a variety of things. And then we know, just having been here, so we know fine arts on every campus, GTE, services, like those are what we consider the baseline. We're not.
We are gonna have a band director at the secondaries, and then we're gonna have an assistant band. Those are things that the campus leaders allocated, and so they have on their template of allocations. They're gonna have an orchestra director, choir, and so at secondary we have positions that each secondary campus has, and then based on student counts and enrollment in those programs, that might increase the FTEs that we allocate.
And then how it deviates, to go to your point about equity, like when we were coming out of COVID, we had ESSER funds. But one of the things that came out from the campuses, specifically the fine arts teachers, was we need support, additional support for more intense tutoring. So I don't know if you remember.
Yeah, they did that for 2
Mr.
years, yeah.
Underwood brought us like a pretty significant request to provide tutoring. That came out of this, kind of this process of like, hey, we're addressing literacy, you're addressing numeracy, but what about the fine arts? Like, what are we gonna do to boost this up?
And
There really was not a process, as far as I could tell, in place before Dr. Cardona, because we did have some campuses that had art classes and other campuses that did not have art teachers. And we had some campuses that had this program and other campuses that had nothing that looked like that program.
Yeah.
So it's really been systematized in the last 7-8 years so that there is more of a process. Not that there can't be improvements, but but looking towards,
Yeah.
especially with an eye toward it being equitable across the
Correct.
district.
And so this is these are campus budgets. We also have budgets for specific programs. I believe we have a SPED budget
Yes.
that's separate from this. Can you talk about how that works with the campus budgets?
Yes, so those are, So you're discussing department budgets, right? So
I guess
like
so, yeah.
Yeah, so the special education department has a
Uh-huh.
budget. Career and tech has a budget.
Okay.
State compensatory education has a budget. Those
What's
are-
that?
State comp is it's a program that supports your at-risk students
Okay.
throughout the school district.
Okay.
So those tie back into your program, your tier one programs, right?
Okay.
That we receive. We don't receive additional funding, but a school district we receive funding based on weighted ADA who are in those programs, and we have to use certain percentages of the funds that we receive from II.A. on those programs. The director of career and tech, right, for example, will work with campus principals, but also work with the career and tech teachers, his stakeholders in the community as well, parent feedback to develop what the CTE budget looks like. It is supplemental. It works hand in hand, primarily with the high school because it is the largest CTE program, but we do have CTE programs in each middle school, so they do also get an allocation. That's just one example of what a department budgetary process looks like. I speak of that because I did that before, and I have firsthand knowledge.
So what departments have budgets then? I think I'm confused when we say department. Do you mean the English department? I don't
No,
think you
you
do.
think
So,
it's-
So academics has probably all the budgets that
Okay.
are under
Sure.
So like when we pay for curriculum, you know, or Amplify, Eureka, the AP materials, that's under academics. That's not campus. Now, if a principal wants to go do additional things above and beyond, they can, but we cover certain items. And like, to answer your question about special education, we're about 18% of our students are special education right now. From the state, we only receive, it was like $7 million, but this board is, since I've been here, is we need to take care of our students who are in special ed. So I think the allocation is somewhere upwards around 19 million. So we cover the other 12 million. And the same for like dual language, you know, there are a certain percentage, the state gives us X percentage. GT, we only get up to 5%. 5% of the total, which isn't a lot, but we have committed that we're gonna support that. So the board covers that gap, I guess.
And then also think of other departments
gap
such as,
insurance.
you know, custodial department, maintenance operation, bus. Those also are department budgets built by that department leader with their stakeholders involved.
okay. And when you give us the numbers budget, it'll include those departments, right?
Yes.
Okay, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah,
It's
it's
been a
up
minute,
below,
but, okay. And so then that is where we see all of the departments that have a budget
Correct.
on paper. Okay.
I have a question about that. So, I mean, I know that in the past, the state was capping the spec ed budget, right? And we were saying that we were going to meet the needs of all of the students in our district who qualified for special education services, regardless of what the state was going to pay us. We said the same thing with Bonham Pre-K. Where are we at these days with how much is the state actually allocating for our full-time, high-quality instructional play-based preschool? Are they paying?
Not 100%, but I can pull those programs.
That would be great to know it, because I'm just curious. I know that they'd changed their grant funding so that we were going to qualify for more funding from the state for it, but I didn't think that we were yet.
I can.
That's coming out of our tax base.
All right, so looking at timelines as we move forward, kind of bundling up what this spring semester looks like. Oh, what happened? Did we just run out of pen? Okay, you have it in front of you. I don't know what happened. I don't know.
We have to pay our Spectrum bill.
Yeah, I think so.
Should we take a quick, let's maybe just take a quick 5-minute break while you guys, yeah.
Thank you.
It's 7:58. We'll reconvene in 5 minutes. With a score from the.
It's bad right now. Michigan's heck out of Washington.
It's like when you speak.
And we are going to look at the timeline for the budget process.
All righty. Apologize for the technical difficulty, but as you can see here, this is our timeline as we move through the rest of the spring semester and move into June. In January, again, we look at our roll-up projections. We start looking at projected revenue, also from our federal side as well. We start looking at revenue projections again as we get more data in February. We start confirming those roll-up projections. We're also in this time frame in February, January, February, looking at district transfers and how that will impact each campus as well. We start looking at your Title I, or campus Title I budgets, the compensatory ed budgets, and then also looking at zero plan meaning if we were not to increase any kind of compensation, this is what staff would cost next year. I just see the error, it should be 23, 24. I apologize for that. In March, we have our revenue projection again. You can see the trend. We're always looking at what that projection will look like, trying to hone in accurate data. Then really, again, kind of going back to the prior conversation, bringing FTE allocations, any kind of requests to our cabinet for discussion, review, and approval. Publishing those department budgets, meeting with principals, and I should also add department leaders as well to review any kind of data change, any kind of trend change, FTE allocation requests, supplemental requests. All that is getting confirmed by cabinet through March, April timeframe. And then we start looking in April about, okay, if we were to adopt this budget, what are those needs? We start looking at procurement and actually getting some procurement rolled out. So that way in June, in July, when the budget opens up, we're able to move quickly and we're not waiting on procurement specifications. By June is when we have to pass and adopt our approved budget. Again, it should be 23, 24. I apologize for that. Our budget in June is passed. By May 6th, we should have some pretty hard numbers for you in terms of what that budget will look like. You can see the remaining budgetary meetings that we'll have at the special call board meetings. We'll look at staff and personnel in February. Again, another budget overview in March. We'll look at compensation plans and any kind of increases or any kind of expansions on stipends in April. And hopefully by, like I said, May, we have a pretty substantial concrete budget that we can bring forth in June to be adopted as well. I do want to talk a little bit about an issue, though, and I'm going to divert from our conversation, that we are facing, and we're not the only ones facing this in Hays County. Every school district is facing this, and really a lot of other counties are facing this issue. So going back to the conversation, Senate Bill 2 passed in late summer, which totally set the domino effect in play. So the tax assessor collectors software program, their vendor had to change their numbers, change their calculations. I don't know the intricacies of it, but it has pushed back the tax collector, the tax assessor collector's time. Again, we should have already collected a significant amount of our revenue here in December. But as you can see here, we were notified by our assessor collector that they're running into several issues, especially with the files, a lot of technical issues from their vendor, and they're waiting for their vendor to resolve those issues. That legislative cap, those changes have pushed all the times back. Basically, they weren't able to put bills out. They were able to get those bills out in late December, I want to say around the 28th.
They still haven't gone out.
What's that?
They haven't gone out.
A few have.
They're still due.
They're
At
still
the end
due,
of
but
this
they
month.
have not. I don't know anybody who's received it. So
Okay.
Yeah, they're all online.
yeah, they're posted
Yes.
online, but they have not been in mail.
We were notified in early December that they were hoping by mid-December they would get those bills out. By mid-December, by Christmas break, it really hadn't gone forth. Looking at December 28th, we did receive notification from the assessor collector that the bills were posted. But as you pointed out, there are still current delays. On January 5th, we received notification that we may get some payments wired to us today Fortunately, we did get some money wired to us. It's really not substantial in terms of it's only 2.1 million. We're really expecting a lot more, and it causes some issues, right? Focus in on that INS, that debt service. We only received out of that payment $661,000. We're seeing that delay in revenue. We're hoping we get that revenue as quickly as possible. We need to be able to get that money into our coffers. What the implications of this is, we will possibly need to utilize our general funds to cover a mandatory debt service payment that's due at the end of the month, actually February 1. So if we need to, if we're not seeing that debt service income based on our tax collection because of this issue, we will need to look at using our general funds, our M&O side, our fund balance, if you will, to make that covered payment. And then once we receive that tax payment, we were able to pull it back into the general fund. The other option, I just wanted to point this out to the board, and it's something that Ms. Garcia and I were talking about. We're anticipating that we'll get this money starting to flow in January. Another option for the district, if need be, God forbid, we need to obtain a small, we could obtain a short-term loan from a bank to make those payments out in anticipation on receiving that income to then close out that short-term loan on a quick side. I wanted to point that out. That's worst case scenario. We look to avoid that, but for like we're talking about, we anticipate receiving those funds, but if something happened, we're getting closer to February and we need to have that occur. We wanted to make sure that was something that we pointed out tonight and it was on your radar and it didn't come to you as a surprise.
I have a couple of questions about this. So you started out by saying that this was happening in Hayes County. Is it unique to Hayes, or was this also in other
No,
counties?
it's several counties throughout the state who, like I said, because of that change in Senate Bill 2 has caused a lot of those assessor collectors, their software had to be reprogrammed, had to be changed. And
And so this is impacting certainly all the districts in Hayes County
every
as well
school
as additional.
district, yes, ma'am. I even spoke to CFO at Hayes CISD today, and he's in the same position that we are.
And the numbers on the M&O and INS that we received today, how do those compare to what you were expecting? I know you don't have I know you don't have a definite number that you were expecting, but ballpark what you were expecting. So the amount that they've given is 2.1 million is 50% of what we would have. Uh-huh.
So as of December, in previous years, in December, we would receive all of our funding in order to pay our payments. This is just one payment that we just received today, so we're short.
Okay, so previous years, by now, we would have gotten that full 6 million. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
May I just make a suggestion then, when we get the fund balance trend next year, that the December has an asterisk on it that explains this? Because I think I also work in an institution where we have this huge jump and then huge dips. Being able to see that this is a consistent trend calms people down, but to see that, wait, what happened, so that we remember a year from now, that would be helpful.
Any other questions?
I did have some more questions about our budgeting and specific to the data that you prepared and presented to us. I'm interested in our funding of extracurricular activities, in part because I think we have a lot of support for that from our community. When you look at the bonds that have passed, they largely support, a lot of them support extracurricular activities. I think we also, as a district, have seen the value of those activities for student performance, and that's why they're valuable, right? Students that participate in extracurricular activities tend to have better academic performance, and they tend to be correlative. To what extent they're causative, I don't know, but they're certainly correlative. So I'm interested in those particular programs, and I wanted to understand some more about them. That's the questions that I sent you. And I do understand that it's complicated to make comparisons across programs because they have different ways that they get funded. There are, academics and extracurricular budgets and things like that. So when we talk about the budgets for extracurricular programs, you provided us with a fine arts budget for the district. I don't see a full district athletics budget, and those budgets line items are allocated, or the responsible party is the director of that department, if I understand correctly.
Correct.
Okay. And then those budgets are developed by that director communicating with the staff at the various schools for those departments. Okay. Are we considering student participation when we develop those budgets, right? So one of the things I'd asked about was how many students are participating in the various activities, and are we sort of matching our investment in those programs based on the students who are participating in them? Or are we doing that based on the budgetary requests or the access to fulfillment of the budget? Do you see what I'm saying? Are we using the number of students who participate to devise those budgets in any way?
I don't know. I don't think we do. I don't know that we've ever attached, like, if there's 200 kids, they're worth X amount of dollars to, for a certain budget. I don't, because they're so hard, they're so difficult. So like, I just think of like choir, right? They have X number of students. They don't raise a lot of money. They just don't have a lot of income.
Sure.
So then when they have a need, they typically go to the director or the principal. And like last year, like I remember we had to purchase their uniforms. That's not something the kids, that's not something we feel the kids need to purchase. We need to take care of that.
Understood.
And then like band, I think this year was another big expenditure for their uniforms. I don't think that's a good question. I don't know that I don't know.
Certainly, I know that the secondary music programs that use instruments I have heard complaints that they need instruments and they are not being purchased, right? And so that's part of what this stems from, is how do we ensure that those programs are being funded appropriately? And one of my concerns is that a lot of these decisions are being made by the cabinet, being brought to the cabinet, and those programs are not necessarily on the cabinet. They don't have the kind of access to make those requests and make those, be involved in those programs. So how are their needs being brought to the decision makers so that they are addressed? And that's
so I would say that there is a responsibility among your directors. When I say directors, I mean like the coaches, the head coaches of the sport, to have a replacement plan in place. Like they should internally have that. Now, I don't know the situation with band. I can tell you that we have approved every request that they have made. Now, band in particular, this goes back to when Dr. Reese Mills was even here. When we first got here, middle school bands didn't even have a budget. So she put a budget in specifically for instruments. And then what we found was the principal wanted to take that money and use it for somewhere else. So then we had to have a conversation with the principal, say, this is for fine arts, this is for band. Their teachers want a replacement plan, so we're going to help them fund that. I think here at the high school, I think probably some of their instruments are really high dollar, and so they probably don't have a replacement plan for that. So we approve, like, yeah, they'll go through supplemental, but sometimes it's.
So do the teachers and the directors of these programs present those supplemental requests to you directly, or do they go through their department leads?
A combination. Like Peyton caught me in the hallway one day here and said, "Hey, I need some instruments." And so then
So I guess.
Right? I mean, that's like he's comfortable with me
Sure.
coming to me. He's like, "Hey, I need 3 Zousaphones and 3."
Sure.
And I was like, "All right." So then I got back to the office and I emailed Underwood and I emailed Terrence. I said, "Peyton Grover needs this. Can we get this done?" And then we approved that.
But I think for me, what's important is that we have that proceduralized. I don't know if y'all know that I lead the process development group. That's what I do. And so having a procedure for things is really important to me. And so that's something that I think that's what I'm getting at is, do we have forms and methods for those things to happen?
Yes, we do.
Okay.
And that's, I apologize, the finance department provides a spreadsheet document that outlines the budget to each department leader, each campus leader, also a supplemental request form. So in their conversations, in their meetings, as they develop that budgetary plan, if they have any additional need that goes above and beyond, that's where those supplemental requests are made. And the
Okay.
process is it goes through the campus leadership or the department leadership, if you will, up to the cabinet for several layers of a review and approval until it's formally approved.
Okay.
So I just wanted to add that, like, Mariachi has their own budget.
Mhm.
Choir has their budget.
Understood.
Band has a budget.
Right.
And then those leaders to those programs are the ones that are in charge of that budget, and they talk to their stakeholders, what's needed, equipment, what have you. And those can be brought forth with the supplemental request to bring additional equipment. And then that's what it gets back to the cabinet level. That's what we approve. So we're not, as cabinet, saying this is what you need. They're giving us the information on what is needed in excess of the budget that we provide them.
And there's mechanisms for those requests to be brought in a kind of consistent way
Yes.
by all of the
Yes.
programs.
If you're hearing the opposite, that's not correct.
I'm just asking
Yeah, I
questions
know.
because I don't understand.
So there is definitely a process for it, and the forms are the same. And
So the fine arts program could bring a request to you, and that would go through what is Mr. Underwood's title regarding this?
He's the director of fine arts and
Okay,
whatever else.
okay, he's a director now.
Yeah, he's a director.
Okay, okay,
Fine.
okay.
And this, actually, this school year, we did approve the 5 hours,
Yeah. Right, and my questions really are around the process, and that we have this process that is available to all programs, and that everyone is aware of and knowing that, and
Yes.
that those stakeholders are being consulted,
yes.
and that their voice is being heard in an equitable way among all of these programs.
Yes, and if, like I said, if you're hearing otherwise, we have been very purposeful in starting with them first.
But I
So
think the
it's-
breakdowns sometimes happen when we have turnover and we have new people heading up departments, that because there's so much to learn when you're a new department chair, head, whatever, learning the process, that I've heard somebody say, oh, blah, 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 and I'm like, every student can get $5 for every meal that if they're going to a band trip. Like, you do not need to be fundraising for that $5.
We
Like,
raise it to $8.
The district does that no matter what program you're participating in, whether it's on a Saturday, on a Tuesday night, whatever it is. If you're doing an away thing, we provide meals, right?
Right.
And some programs just aren't aware of that because they're like,
Yes.
well, this is the first time we've ever done this kind of contest before, and so it's a new person who's very excited about it, but
Understood.
doing it didn't know, right?
Absolutely.
Those are the most of the exceptions I've heard.
But like last year, the band director, they needed a new truck, so they went through the process, and you remember y'all approved us purchasing a $70,000 Dodge Dually to pull the trailer. But there was band specific only.
Yeah,
So that came from them because of a need.
okay.
Margie, you had a question?
And then like
I
Friday,
don't know how you would phrase
so
that.
some of it happens intrinsically, like I was in the auditorium, part of the 2023 bond is to it needs TLC, the auditorium, if you've been in there. You know, the sound system's a little bit legacy system. But like part of it was I was on the microphone and then I got off and texted people and said, it's time to upgrade our system. Like when is this gonna happen? Like we have one act play coming up, these kids need to have working mics. Like that needs to happen quickly so that when they're performing, they're not having issues. And our fine arts people are pretty comfortable emailing me stuff.
Thank you. I think I brought up all of the things I had.
I think Ms. Viapano had a question too.
And a comment. Well, this is interesting because I think finally our school has got the instruments that it seems that they have the instruments that they need, and it was not always the case. But are our instruments all purchased, or are they rented, or is it some of both?
We purchase.
You purchase, you don't rent the instruments?
But-
Okay. And they're used for
But
the
some
current
students buy their
students and
own,
what?
some students procure their own instruments.
Oh, okay.
and
Well, I
some-
would
and the school
imagine that they
provides
would-
some, yeah.
And some of our instruments are borrowed from other schools currently.
Correct.
And what we Miss Cantu and I happened to be at the office on, when Goodnight came and serenaded them. And you're not gonna believe what impressed me the most, this instrument. It was this, it looked like two pieces of this wood, and it clapped together. They were doing the dash into the snow, and when they and it just clapped. Oh, I loved it.
So-
and this little girl just went up there and jumped and clapped that thing, and it sounded so good.
Yeah, so one of the other things we systematized when Mr. Sandoval, when we gave him an extra duties, because he did so great in construction, and remember we gave him procurement, remember he took over procurement. One of the things we systematized was buying from buy board for musical instruments, because you can get such a cheaper value. But that is a fight that we had with some of the fine arts directors. They wanted to go to their friends to purchase, and we were like, no, you are gonna go through buy board because we get the best value for the district. It's the same instrument, you know, you're talking about Yamaha, trumpet, you know, and we finally got them on board that we can get quicker turnaround, you know, with some of those things, but.
And how do we evaluate if we want to, if we are seeing expansion or contraction of some of these programs? Like, is there a way that we evaluate that? We say, oh, it looks like this is very popular right now. Right, we had a state champion wrestler. I'm sure that increased our interest in wrestling. How do we support that as a district? Is that something that we evaluate, or we're seeing a big growth in this program, and is that part of this process?
Yes, and I think it ties back into looking at the FTE, the student enrollment, right? And
Okay.
the ADA within those programs specifically. As
Okay.
those programs influx with the higher number of students, they could potentially get that FTE, they could potentially get additional support to support the additional students in the program.
So like wrestling is a perfect example.
Yeah.
So she won state championship, and the coaches approached their principals who went to Walsh and said, we want to do middle school wrestling. And Walsh said, okay, we can do middle school wrestling, but you first have to show us that you're going to have a sustained student group. And then the very next year, we provided middle school wrestling stipends because we hadn't. But that came through kind of an organic process from the ground up because of a state champion. Yeah.
Or just enrollment of students, right? 40% increase in band and color guard over year. If that continues, we're already, bursting. And I think that our community supports this when we see the way that they support the bonds. But the bonds are not going to, the bonds will create the building. We will have to have the budgets to, and this is absolutely true when we talk about building an auditorium, right? We haven't really considered the expenses that are going to happen every year, all the time, to support that, which I think, those are things that we really have to be aware of as we're going forward on things like this, that we're building these facilities, and we do have the support of our community, but we need to finance them and we need to fund them so that they can be successful and not just have a pretty space.
Correct.
For that to happen,
But like
if
for the
we see the value in it.
So like for the natatorium, we have thought about those. Y'all may not know, but we have brought in, we have gone to visit schools that have natatoriums, and the person that's a swim coach, we have them thinking of, okay, during the day, how can community members come in and pay $5 a month to help us supplement, paying for the mechanical and.
Well, and the
all that
staff
stuff.
needed to maintain that, right? I mean, we're
We
talking
have
about
a staff built
additional.
in. We already have a swim coach, so that's not an additional FTE.
I mean, I think also, though, we'd be remiss if we did not remember that the booster clubs play a big role in making
Absolutely
those
do.
things feasible, and isn't going to diminish at all, right? I mean, there's parts of it that are structural, like in terms of bringing the orchestra program down to the 5th grade, right? And we've done that across the board. But for other supplemental costs, I mean, even, the boys booster club is paying for the scoreboard in the revamp of the field, right? So there are costs that the booster clubs are going to continue to
Absolutely.
to support and bear. I mean, that's real. I mean, and I just think it's real because we've just seen the budget, right? Like, there's no way we're going to be able to pay for everything out of our budgeted allocations. So
Absolutely.
but I think
Absolutely,
making sure
but
the
sometimes,
conversation
those booster
right,
club
is
requirements
fair.
and those fees become gatekeepers for participation.
Yeah.
And I think that that's really true for some of our fine arts
Absolutely.
programs. Yeah.
Dance has the Diamond has an amazing booster club.
Yes.
They do, but I think-
And I think that sometimes those things are gatekeepers for participation. And I think that's an example of one, right? And that we need to be cognizant of that and make sure that we're giving that opportunity to all the students. Because transportation is the other gatekeeper.
Right.
Right? And that, I think transportation is as big of a gatekeeper as the fundraising part of it. And so I think we've done a good job of facilitating that as a district, but I want us to be cognizant of it because I think it is really valuable to increasing student performance academically if they're engaged, and that's what we can do.
I just wanted to make a comment since Dr. Cardona brought up the subject of buy board. Buy board has a lot of different things that has available to us as a school district, and when we do participate with buy board, they do recognize us at our conferences that we go to. Just wanted to mention that because they really pay attention to that we are using their services for different things that the school needs. Just mention.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
I second that.
Motion made
Time?
and seconded. All in favor, please raise your hand.
Aye.
Thanks, everybody. Happy New Year. See you next week on Tuesday.
Who seconded it?
Miss Clem.
Hey, I've lost 5 pounds, so I get to eat a chili dog tonight.
Brian.
Just hand.